The sound of crystal shattering against Italian marble is the loudest thing in any fine dining restaurant. On that rain-soaked Tuesday evening at the Sterling, the silence that followed was even louder. The wine glass lay in pieces near table 7, a constellation of glittering shards catching the amber glow of the chandeliers. Marcus Sterling stood over the wreckage, his face the color of spoiled meat, his finger jabbing the air like a weapon aimed at the young server who had dropped it. "Do you have any idea," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the dining room with the precision of a surgeon's blade, "how much that glass costs, do you?" The server, a girl barely 20 with tears already forming in the corners of her eyes, shook her head. $300, Marcus continued, loud enough for every patron to hear. Loud enough to make sure they knew he was protecting them from incompetence. That is $300 of baccarat crystal that you just destroyed because you cannot perform the most basic function of your job. From the shadows near the kitchen door, Sarah Chen watched. She had seen this performance before, many times. Marcus never disciplined staff in private. That would waste the opportunity to demonstrate his authority, to remind the wealthy diners that standards were being maintained, that their experience was being protected from the help. Sarah adjusted her apron, feeling the stiff fabric dig into her waist. The black trousers she wore were the same ones she had bought 3 years ago, back when she still believed her linguistics degree might lead somewhere other than this. The white shirt was crisp because she ironed it herself every morning in her studio apartment, the one with the broken heater in the bathroom door that never quite closed all the way. Her feet ached. 9 hours into her shift, 6 days this week. The math was simple and brutal. $2,400 a month, plus tips that Marcus had a creative habit of redistributing according to his own sense of fairness. After rent, after the minimum payment on her mother's medical debt, after groceries bought from the discount section at the QFC on Capitol Hill, Sarah had exactly $127 in her checking account. She had a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Washington. She spoke 3 languages fluently and could read 2 more. She had spent 3 years in Osaka, teaching English to students who bowed when they entered her classroom, who thanked her at the end of every lesson, who treated education like a sacred gift. And now she served wine to people who snapped their fingers at her. "Sarah," Marcus's voice cut through her thoughts like a cleaver through bone. "Table 9 is waiting for their barbaresco. Do I need to pour it myself, or are you planning to join us in reality tonight?" Sarah moved. After 3 years of this, her body knew the choreography by instinct. Weave between tables. Smile with just the right amount of warmth, but not familiarity. Never make eye contact for too long. Be present but invisible. Exist but do not intrude. She reached for the bottle of barbaresco, feeling the weight of it in her hand. $400 of wine. She could live for a week on what was in this bottle. But to the man at table 9, to Mr. Whitmore with his Rolex and his perfectly tailored suit and his habit of letting his eyes linger too long on the female servers, this was just Tuesday. The Sterling occupied the ground floor of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, one of those buildings that looked like it had been extruded from the earth by pure concentrated wealth. Outside, the rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, with the fury of a Pacific Northwest winter storm. Thunder rolled across the sound, shaking the crystal chandeliers. But inside, the chaos of nature was reduced to ambient noise, drowned out by the careful clink of silver against bone china and the low murmur of 7-figure deals being negotiated over grass-fed beef. Sarah poured the barbaresco for Mr. Whitmore without spilling a drop. He did not look up from his phone. "Careful with that," his wife said, not to Sarah, but to the air above her head. "The help is getting clumsier these days." Sarah had not spilled anything. She had not even come close. But apologies were expected, so she gave one. "My apologies, ma'am." She retreated to the shadows, to the narrow space near the kitchen door, where the servers waited between commands. Carlos was there, the dishwasher from the hotel next door, who sometimes picked up shifts when the Sterling needed extra hands. He had worked in restaurants for 20 years. His hands were scarred from burns and cuts, badges of a profession that destroyed bodies for minimum wage. "You okay?" Carlos asked in Spanish. Sarah answered in the same language. "Same as always." "Marcus is worse tonight. Something has him scared." Sarah had noticed. Marcus was always performing, always playing the role of the exacting floor manager. But tonight there was an edge to it, a desperation. He kept checking his watch, kept scanning the room like he was expecting someone. "Rumor is the new owner might show up," Carlos said. "Mystery shopper style. Test the place before the deal closes." The Sterling was being sold. Everyone knew it. The current ownership group, some faceless corporation that owned half the real estate in Seattle, had agreed to sell the restaurant to a Japanese conglomerate, the Yamamoto Group. Sarah had looked them up after hearing the news. Hotels, restaurants, luxury properties across Asia. The kind of money that made American millionaires look like they were playing with pocket change. The deal was supposed to close Friday, 3 days from now. If that's true, Sarah said, then Marcus is about to have a very bad night. Carlos laughed, but it was not a happy sound. When does Marcus ever have a good night? The rain intensified. Sarah could see it through the windows, sheets of water transforming the city dream into an impressionist painting. The weather in Seattle had two modes, raining and about to rain. Tonight it was doing both with enthusiasm. She thought about Osaka. 3 years she had spent there, from 2019 to 2022, teaching English at a private language school in the Kansai region. She had arrived knowing textbook Japanese and left speaking it the way locals did, with the rhythms and inflections that marked her as someone who had done more than visit. She had learned to bow at exactly the right angle for every social situation. She had learned that silence could be more eloquent than words. She had learned that a culture could build itself on the foundation of mutual respect, that dignity was not a luxury reserved for the wealthy. Then her mother had gotten sick. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the kind that gave you months instead of years. Sarah had taken the first flight back to Seattle. She had held her mother's hand in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and despair. She had signed forms she did not understand, agreeing to treatments that cost more than she earned in a year, knowing they would not work but unable to say no, because what child tells their mother to give up? Her mother had died on a Tuesday. 6 months ago, almost to the day. The debt had survived her, $87,000. Medical bills that arrived with the regularity of seasons, each one a reminder that, in America, dying was expensive, but being the one left behind was even more costly. So Sarah had stayed in Seattle, had taken the first job she could find that would cover rent and debt payments, had walked into the Sterling wearing the same outfit she had worn to her mother's funeral, and had lied when Marcus asked if she had restaurant experience. She had experience being invisible. That was close enough. Heads up, Carlos's voice snapped her back to the present. He was looking toward the entrance, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. Sarah followed his gaze. The heavy oak doors of the Sterling were struggling against the wind. Through the rain-blurred glass, she could see a figure pushing from the outside, fighting the storm for entry. The door finally surrendered. It swung open with enough force to rattle the coat rack, bringing with it a gust of freezing wind and rain that sent napkins flying from the nearest tables. And then he walked in. The man was old. Sarah's first thought was that he looked like someone's grandfather, the kind who got confused on bus routes and needed help finding his way home. He was short, maybe 5'4", with gray hair plastered to his skull by rain. Wire-rimmed glasses sat crooked on his nose, the lenses fogged from the temperature change between the storm outside and the climate-controlled sanctuary of the restaurant. He wore a tan raincoat that looked like it had been purchased at a surplus store sometime in the 1990s and forgotten about until today. It hung on his small frame like a tarp, stained dark with water, dripping a spreading puddle onto the pristine marble of the foyer. His trousers were baggy, bunching at the ankles over scuffed walking shoes that squeaked with each hesitant step. In his arms, clutched against his chest like a lifeline, was a leather briefcase. The leather was old but well-maintained, the kind of quality that endured. His hands gripped it with the desperate strength of someone protecting the only thing they owned. He looked lost. He looked poor. And in the Sterling, poverty was the unforgivable sin. The restaurant went silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every head turned toward the entrance, toward the dripping figure who had violated the unspoken rule that people like him did not belong in places like this. Mrs. Whitmore, the woman who had warned Sarah about the clumsiness of the help, clutched her pearl necklace as if the old man might snatch it. Mr. Vandenberg at table 2 stood up, wiping his mouth with a napkin embroidered with the Sterling's logo. "What on earth," he said to no one in particular, "is that?" Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. She recognized the look in the old man's eyes. She had seen it in her own reflection during the months after her mother's death, when the world seemed to have forgotten she existed, when she walked through crowds feeling like a ghost. He was not lost. He was looking for something. Someone. But before she could process that thought, Marcus Sterling was already moving. Marcus crossed the dining room with the purposeful stride of a man defending his territory. His shoes clicked against the marble with metronomic precision. He had excellent posture, the kind that came from years of service industry work, from standing for 12-hour shifts while pretending your spine was not slowly compressing into agony. He positioned himself between the old man and the dining room proper, arms crossed over his chest, face arranged into an expression of professional disdain. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said, his voice loud enough to carry, loud enough to perform. "Deliveries are made through the back entrance. This is the main dining room. You cannot be in here." The old man blinked up at him through fogged glasses. He started to speak, then stopped. Tried again. "Table di bababo," he said. His voice was rough, accented. "I need table, please." Marcus let out a laugh. It was not a kind sound. It was the laugh of someone who had found an opportunity to demonstrate power. He looked around at the nearby tables, making sure he had an audience. "Sir," Marcus said, speaking slowly and loudly, as if volume could overcome the language barrier. "This is the Sterling. We are fully booked, months in advance. We have a dress code. You are currently violating approximately 6 different health and safety regulations just by standing on my floor." The old man's grip on his briefcase tightened. He shook his head, adamant. "No, I come back. I eat here. Is important." "What is important?" Marcus said, his voice dropping into that dangerous register Sarah had learned to recognize. "Is that you leave, right now, before I call the police to remove you." The old man looked past Marcus, scanning the dining room. His eyes moved from table to table, face to face, as if searching for someone specific. There was something in his expression that was not confusion or fear. It was disappointment, profound and sad. He tried to speak again, but the English seemed to fail him. Frustration bled into his voice. He switched languages, words tumbling out in a rapid staccato rhythm that Sarah's brain recognized instantly. Japanese. He was speaking Japanese. "Koko no owner wa doko desu ka?" the old man said, his voice rising. "Where is the owner of this place?" Marcus recoiled as if the foreign words were an attack. "Stop that," he snapped. "Speak English or get out. I do not have time for your gibberish." "Please." The old man tried again in English, his accent thick with stress. "I see manager, big boss, owner." "I am the manager," Marcus lied. Technically, he was the floor manager, not the general manager, and certainly not the owner. But Marcus had never let facts interfere with his authority. "And I am telling you to leave." The old man peered at Marcus's name tag through his rain-streaked glasses. He shook his head vigorously. "No, not you, real boss, owner." "The owner is not here," Marcus said. His hand reached out, fingers closing around the wet fabric of the old man's raincoat sleeve. "Now you have made your scene. Time to go." The reaction was instant and violent. The old man jerked his arm away with surprising strength for someone so small and seemingly frail. He shouted something in Japanese, a single word that cracked through the air like a whip. "Sawaruna, do not touch me." The restaurant became a photograph. Every person frozen, every breath held. Mr. Vandenberg rose to his full height, all 6 feet of indignant wealth. "Marcus," he bellowed across the dining room, "why is this vagrant screaming at us? I am trying to enjoy a $300 steak here." Marcus's face had gone from pale to purple. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. This was spiraling out of control. This was exactly the kind of scene that could reach the ears of the new ownership, could cost him his job, could destroy the fragile kingdom he had built. He turned toward the coat check, toward the security station, toward Travis. Travis was 6'2" and 240 pounds, a former college linebacker who had discovered that checking IDs and removing drunks paid better than most entry-level jobs. He wore an earpiece that connected to nothing and a blazer that barely contained his shoulders. He was exactly the kind of muscle that expensive restaurants kept on hand for situations like this. Marcus caught his eye, made a gesture. "Come here. Handle this." Travis began moving toward the foyer, cracking his knuckles in a way that suggested he enjoyed this part of his job a little too much. The old man saw Travis approaching, saw the size of him, the intent. And for the first time, something like panic entered his expression. His hands fumbled with the latches of his briefcase, shaking fingers trying to open it. "He has got a weapon!" Mrs. Whitmore shrieked from table 7. "Oh my God, he has got a weapon!" The panic that followed was immediate and instinctive. Chairs scraped back, women gasped. Men reached for their phones, already imagining how they would describe this to friends, to social media, to anyone who would listen to their story of surviving danger in a 5-star restaurant. "Grab him!" Marcus screamed at Travis. "Now!" Travis lunged, His large hands caught the old man's shoulders, spinning him around with enough force to send the briefcase tumbling from his grasp. It hit the marble with a heavy thud but did not open. The old man cried out, not in anger, in pain. Travis had wrenched his arms behind his back, applying pressure that would leave bruises, maybe worse. The old man was shouting now, rapid-fire Japanese, desperate, pleading. The words poured out of him like water from a broken pipe, incomprehensible to everyone in the room. Everyone except Sarah. She understood every word. He was not threatening them. He was trying to warn them, trying to explain, trying to tell them who he was before this went any further. But no one was listening. Sarah looked around the dining room. At the wealthy patrons watching like this was dinner theater. At Marcus, his face triumphant because he had contained the threat and protected his domain. At Travis, applying pressure to the arms of a man who had to be in his 70s, who weighed maybe 130 pounds, who was no threat to anyone. She thought about her mother, about sitting in that hospital room, holding a hand that had grown thin and cold, listening to nurses speak about her like she was not there, invisible, unworthy of being seen. She thought about Osaka, about her students who bowed, about the elderly couple who ran the izakaya near her apartment, who always saved her a seat at the bar, who learned her name and asked about her day. She thought about the fact that she had exactly $127 in her checking account and that what she was about to do would probably cost her this job. And she did it anyway. The water pitcher she had been holding hit the service counter with a dull thump. Water sloshed over the rim, pooling on the polished wood. She did not care. Sarah hiked up the skirt of her uniform and ran. Her shoes slapped against the marble. She heard the gasp from the diners as she crossed the floor, protocol and propriety abandoned. She heard Marcus shout her name, heard the disbelief and rage in his voice. She did not stop. She pushed between Travis and Marcus, putting her body between them and the old man. Up close, she could see things the others had missed. See past the cheap raincoat to the watch on his wrist. The watch was partially hidden by the soaked sleeve, but she recognized it. A Patek Philippe. She had seen them in the luxury stores of Osaka, in glass cases that required appointments to view. That watch cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But more than the watch, she saw his eyes, sharp, intelligent, filled with a disappointment so deep it was almost grief. "Let him go, Travis," Sarah said. Her voice shook, but it carried. "Sarah, get back to your section." Marcus's face had gone beyond purple into some new color entirely. "Are you insane?" She ignored him. She kept her eyes on the old man, on those intelligent eyes behind the fog glasses. Travis still had him pinned. "Miss Chen, he was reaching for something in the case." "He was not reaching for a weapon," Sarah said. And then she did something she had not done in 2 years, something she had thought she might never do again. She bowed, brought the shallow nod Americans gave to acknowledge someone. A real bow. Deep, respectful, her spine bending to exactly 45 degrees held for the precise length of time that conveyed sincerity. When she straightened, she took a breath, felt her mind shift gears, felt neural pathways light up that had been dormant since she left Japan. She spoke, not in English, in Japanese. Formal. Perfect. "Okiaku-sama," Sarah said. "Honored guest. Taihen shitsurei itashimashita." "We have been terribly rude." "Okega wa arimasen ka?" "Are you injured?" The effect was instantaneous. The old man stopped struggling. His entire body went still. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her feel like she was being seen, truly seen for the first time in months. When he spoke, his voice was still agitated, still stressed, but no longer shouting. "Kimi wa," he said. "You. Nihongo ga hanasemasu ka?" "You can speak Japanese?" Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight since her mother died. Since she came back to the city, since she started working in this restaurant full of people who looked through her. "Hi," she said. "Yes, Sukoshi dake desu." Only a little. It was a lie. She was fluent, but humility was part of the language, built into its structure. Marcus was making sounds, sputtering, confused sounds. "What? What are you doing? What is he saying?" Sarah looked at her manager. At this man who had made her life miserable for 3 years, who had stolen her tips and criticized her smile and treated her like she was less than human. When she spoke, her voice was cold, clear. "He is asking if you are all deaf," Sarah said, "and he is asking why you are treating the owner of the Yamamoto Group like a criminal." The silence that followed was absolute, complete. The kind of silence that happens when reality shifts, When the fundamental assumptions about a situation invert, when people realize they have made a terrible mistake. Marcus blinked, his mouth open, closed, opened again. The what group? The Yamamoto Group. Moto Group, Sarah repeated, each word a hammer blow. The company that is finalizing the purchase of the Sterling this Friday. This is Mr. Takeshi Yamamoto, the chairman. Travis's hands released the old man like he had been burned. He stepped back so quickly he nearly tripped over his own feet. Yamamoto adjusted his raincoat, straightened his glasses. There was no anger in his movements, just a quiet, terrible dignity. He looked at Sarah. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly, a slight smile touched the corners of his mouth. He said something in Japanese, quiet enough that only Sarah could hear. Anata wa yuitsu no hito desu. You are the only one. Then louder, he pointed at Marcus. The words he spoke next were rapid, precise, the kind of Japanese that came from boardrooms and negotiations in decades of business. Sarah translated. Her voice rang clear across the silent dining room. He says he came here tonight alone, without his security, without his staff, because he wanted to see how this restaurant treats a man who appears to have nothing. He wanted to see the soul of his new investment. Marcus had gone from purple to white. The color drained from his face like water from a broken glass. Sir, he started, I did not know it is a security protocol. We have very strict standards. I mean, look at him. He gestured at the wet raincoat, at the cheap clothes. How was I supposed to know? Yamamoto understood the gesture even without translation. The insult was universal. He bent down, picked up his briefcase from where it had fallen, clicked the latches open with steady hands. Inside was not a gun, not a bomb, not a weapon of any kind, just a single file folder and a bottle. Very old, very expensive. Sock that had been aging longer than most of the servers had been alive. Yamamoto pulled out the document, walked to table 5. The best seat in the house, the table where senators and tech CEOs made deals that shaped the city. He sat down, his wet raincoat soaked into the $2,000 velvet of the chair. He placed the sake bottle on the white tablecloth with the gentle care of someone handling something precious. Then he looked at Sarah, gestured to the empty chair across from him. Suwate, he said. Sit. Sarah felt every eye in the restaurant on her, felt the weight of the moment pressing down. Sir, she whispered in English. I cannot. I am working. I will be fired. Yamamoto's smile grew, not cruel, amused, like he was enjoying a private joke that the universe had set up perfectly. He looked at Marcus. Marcus, who was standing frozen, who looked like he might vomit or faint or both. Manager, Yamamoto said in English. His accent was thick, but his meaning clear. Yes, Mr. Yamamoto, Marcus squeaked. She is fired? Yamamoto pointed at Sarah. Marcus looked between them. Calculations ran behind his eyes. Terror and self-preservation warred with 3 years of contempt. Self-preservation won. No, sir, Marcus said. Of course not. She is our best employee. Good, Yamamoto said. Then she is on break. She eats with me. Sarah felt the room spin, felt reality tilt. Mrs. Whitmore looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Mr. Vandenberg's mouth hung open. The entire restaurant, Seattle's wealthiest and most powerful, watched a waitress get seated at the best table while they waited for their desserts. No one said a word. Sarah sat. Yamamoto poured sake into 2 small cups he produced from the briefcase. The amber liquid caught the light, glowing like captured sunset. Now, he said in Japanese, I want to tell the room a story. You will translate for me. Sarah looked at the captivated crowd, at faces she had served for 3 years without them ever learning her name. He wants to speak to everyone, she announced. Yamamoto stood, raised his cup. When he spoke, his voice carried. Sarah translated, sentence by sentence. 30 years ago, I washed dishes in a place very much like this. In Tokyo, I was young, poor. I broke a plate one night. The room was silent. The owner beat me, threw me into the street, into the rain, like I was garbage. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. She steadied it. I swore that night, bleeding in an alley, that if I ever owned a restaurant, I would never let a man go hungry or be humiliated because of his clothes. Yamamoto's eyes, when he looked at Marcus, were not angry. They were sad. Tonight I was tested. This restaurant failed. He turned to Sarah. But one person passed. The kitchen doors burst open. Chef Andre Dubois stormed out, wiping his hands on a towel, oblivious to the tableau frozen in the dining room. He had been in the kitchen for the last hour, focused on plates and temperatures and the thousand small fires that made up dinner service. He had not heard the commotion, had not seen the drama unfold. All he knew was that tickets had stopped moving. "Marcus," Andre's voice boomed, "where's the order for table 4? And why in God's name is the waitress sitting down drinking with a homeless man?" The air left the room. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, praying perhaps that when he opened them, this would all be a nightmare from which he could wake. Yamamoto looked at the chef, looked at Sarah. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, dangerous. "Who is this man?" "The head chef," Sarah whispered. Yamamoto sighed, pulled out his phone, dialed a number, put it on speaker. A voice answered immediately. "Yes, Chairman." "The deal for the sterling," Yamamoto said in clear English. "Change the terms." "Sir?" "Fire the management. All of it, effective immediately." The sound of Marcus dropping his tray echoed like a gunshot. Crystal shattered. Again. Always shattering in this place. "I want to appoint a new interim manager," Yamamoto continued. "Right now." "Who, sir?" Yamamoto looked at Sarah. "What is your last name again?" Sarah's heart stopped. "Chen." "Miss Chen," he said into the phone, "draft the contract." The voice on the phone hesitated. "Miss Chen? I do not see a Chen on the executive list." "She is the waitress," Yamamoto said calmly, "and she is the only one who knows who I am." The restaurant erupted into chaos. The adrenaline crash came at 6 in the morning. Sarah woke not to her alarm, but to the buzzing of her phone against the particle board nightstand in her Capitol Hill studio. The apartment was cold. The heater had given up sometime in the night, surrendering to the same entropy that claimed everything cheap and temporary. She reached for the phone with a hand that still ached from the scrubbing wine stains the night before. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. Seattle area code, but not one she recognized. "Hello," she said. Her voice came out as a croak. "Miss Chen?" The voice on the other end was crisp. British. The kind of accent that came from expensive schools and generations of privilege. "This is William Cross, legal counsel for the Yamamoto Group. I am downstairs." Sarah sat up so quickly her vision blurred. "Downstairs?" "Outside your apartment building. Mr. Yamamoto has requested a briefing at the restaurant at 7 o'clock sharp. I suggest you hurry. Traffic is dreadful." The call ended. Sarah looked at the clock. 6:04. She had 56 minutes to transform herself from the woman who had collapsed into bed at 2 in the morning, still wearing her work clothes, into someone who could face whatever came next. She moved on autopilot. Shower. 3 minutes, barely enough time to wash away the smell of the restaurant that seemed to have soaked into her skin. The blazer she pulled from her closet was the same one she had worn to job interviews 2 years ago, back when she still believed her degrees might matter. Black slacks that she had ironed Sunday night for a week of shifts that now seemed to belong to a different lifetime. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror looked like a stranger. Dark circles under her eyes, hair still damp. She looked, she thought, like someone who had just been handed the keys to a kingdom and had no idea what doors they opened. She grabbed a piece of toast, did not taste it, ran down 3 flights of stairs because the elevator had been broken since October, and the landlord kept promising to fix it next week. The town car, waiting at the curb, was the nicest vehicle that had ever stopped on this block. Black, gleaming even in the gray pre-dawn light. The kind of car that whispered about money so old and established it did not need to shout. A man stood beside the rear door. Tall, skeletal, wire-rimmed glasses that caught the streetlight. He wore a suit that looked like it could cut glass and an expression that suggested he had already judged Sarah and found her wanting. "Miss Chen," he said, not a greeting, a statement of fact. "Get in." The interior of the car smelled like leather and something else, something expensive that Sarah could not identify. William Cross sat beside her but did not speak. He spent the entire drive typing on a tablet, his fingers moving with the mechanical precision of someone who had long ago replaced human inefficiency with digital perfection. Sarah watched the city slide past the tinted windows. Seattle at dawn. The streets were empty except for the homeless sleeping in doorways and the early shift workers trudging toward bus stops. 2 populations, the invisible and the soon-to-be invisible. 20 minutes later, they pulled up in front of the Sterling. The front doors were unlocked. Lights were on inside. Wrong, the cleaning crew did not arrive until 9. The restaurant should have been dark. Locked. Sleeping off the excesses of the previous night. "Who opened the restaurant?" Sarah asked. William Cross checked his watch. "A Patek Philippe, of course." "You are the manager, Miss Chen. You tell me." Sarah ran through the foyer where Yamamoto had stood dripping just hours ago. Through the dining room where every table had been perfectly reset, where crystal gleamed and silver caught the early light, and then the smell hit her. Rot and sweetness. Wine turned to vinegar, the acrid bite of alcohol soaking into fabric and wood. She rounded the corner to the bar. Every bottle on the display shelf had been smashed. Hundreds of them. Thousands of dollars of inventory reduced to glittering shards and spreading pools of liquid that looked like blood in the dim light. Red wine soaking into the carpet, into the custom millwork, into everything it touched. The smell was overwhelming. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. On the wall behind the bar, painted in jagged letters with what looked like lipstick, were words that made her blood run cold. The help does not belong here. Vandalism, William Cross said from behind her. His voice held no emotion. He might have been commenting on the weather. Estimated damage, $50,000. Not a very auspicious start to your tenure, Miss Chen. Sarah's hands curled into fists. This was Marcus. He still had a key. Mr. Sterling's key card was confiscated last night, Cross said. He pulled out his tablet, began typing. Unless there was a duplicate key, which would represent a failure in security protocol, which, as of approximately 9 hours ago, falls under your purview. I have been the manager for 9 hours, Sarah said. Her voice shook. Mr. Yamamoto does not care about timelines, Cross replied. He cares about results. He stepped over a puddle of wine that had spread like an oil slick across the floor. His shoes, Sarah noticed, were probably worth more than her monthly rent. Tonight, Cross continued, we are hosting the Seattle City Council's Future of Seattle Gala. The mayor will be in attendance, 50 dignitaries, council members. The people who decide whether Yamamoto Group gets the permits it needs for future development in this city. He turned to face her. Behind the wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes were the color of old ice. If this restaurant looks like a crime scene when they arrive, the Yamamoto Group loses face. If we lose face, the acquisition deal may be voided. If the deal is voided, Miss Chen, you will not merely be fired. You will be held financially liable for damages due to negligence. Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Liable? I do not have that kind of money. Then I suggest, William Cross said, settling into a chair at one of the clean tables, opening his laptop like he was about to check email. You get to work. You have 12 hours. Sarah stood in the wreckage. The carpet beneath her feet squelched with wine. The wall screamed its message in red lipstick. The smell made her eyes water. 12 hours. She pulled out her phone. She did not call the police. That would take too long, would bring questions and reporters and bad publicity that would give Yamamoto every reason to walk away from this disaster. She did not call a professional cleaning service. Those cost money she did not have authorization to spend. She called the only people she could trust. The number rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. Bueno? Carlos, Sarah said. It's Sarah, I need a favor. Anything, mija. What is wrong? Everything. Can you bring everyone you know who owes me a favor? And Carlos, bring the steam cleaner. Within an hour, the back door of the Sterling opened. It was not a professional crew. It was something better. Carlos came first with 3 of his cousins, men who worked the dish pit at the hotel next door, who had hands scarred from years of hot water and harsh chemicals. They took one look at the destruction and did not ask questions. They just went to work. Rosa arrived next. Sarah had met her at the bus stop 2 years ago, had helped translate a letter from her son's school, had spent an afternoon navigating the labyrinth of parent-teacher conferences and IEP meetings. Rosa brought her 2 sons, both in their 20s, both strong enough to move the heavy furniture that needed to be shifted. Leo came. The dishwasher from the Sterling, the kid Sarah had helped with his community college application, who was trying to become the first person in his family to get a degree. He brought industrial fans borrowed from the laundromat where his sister worked. Maria, Chen, Jackson, names and faces of people who worked in the shadows of the city, who cleaned hotel rooms and washed dishes and drove delivery trucks. People who were invisible to the wealthy patrons of places like the Sterling. People who remembered the ones who had been kind to them. They did not ask what happened. They did not need to. They understood the language of sabotage, of powerful people punishing those who stepped out of line. They just worked. William Cross watched from his table in the corner. He did not help. He did not offer suggestions. He simply observed, typing notes on his tablet, his face expressionless. Sarah dropped to her hands and knees and began to scrub. The wine had soaked deep into the carpet fibers, staining them a purple that looked like old bruises. She mixed club soda with white vinegar, a trick her grandmother had taught her when Sarah was 8 years old and had spilled grape juice on the living room floor. The memory hit her with unexpected force. She was 8. Her grandmother's house in the International District. The old woman with hands gnarled from decades of work in restaurant kitchens, kneeling beside young Sarah on the floor. "You see this stain?" Her grandmother had said in Mandarin. "Life gives you many stains. Some people panic. Some people hide. Smart people clean." "But how?" young Sarah had asked, tears on her cheeks because she thought she had ruined something precious. "Acid and bubbles," her grandmother said, pouring vinegar over the stain. "Chemistry and elbow grease. Remember this, Sarah. There is no mess that cannot be fixed if you ask the right people for help." Sarah blinked. She was not 8 anymore. Her grandmother had been dead for 10 years. Her mother for 6 months. She was 26 and scrubbing wine out of carpet in a restaurant she now somehow managed, working alongside people who should have been strangers but felt like family. Carlos was repainting the wall, matching the texture of the Venetian plaster with a skill that spoke of years working construction before restaurants. His hands moved with the certainty of someone who understood that fixing things was more valuable than breaking them. Rosa and her sons were running the industrial fans, the sound a steady white noise that filled the space where anxiety wanted to live. By noon, the restaurant smelled like lemons instead of rot. The glass had been swept. The carpet was still damp but no longer purple. The wall was clean, the lipstick scrubbed away, fresh plaster drying under the fans. But Sarah still had a problem. The wine cellar was decimated. Every bottle from the display had been destroyed, and tonight's gala menu had been planned around the specific pairings. Vintage Bordeaux with the beef course, aged Riesling with the fish, wines that had been chosen months ago, that guests were expecting. That represented the level of sophistication the Sterling promised. All gone. Sarah walked to the office, found the supplier list, and dialed the main distributor. "Cascade Wine and Spirits," a bored voice answered. "This is Sarah Chen from the Sterling. I need an emergency delivery. Tonight's gala menu requires specific vintage selections and our inventory was damaged. I need you to pull from your reserve stock." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "I'm sorry," the voice said, no longer bored, now cautious. "The Sterling account is currently on credit hold." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. "What?" "Mr. Sterling called this morning, said the restaurant is filing for bankruptcy, instructed us to cancel all pending deliveries and freeze the account pending payment of outstanding balance." "That is a lie," Sarah said. She was gripping the phone hard enough to hurt. "Marcus Sterling was fired last night. I am the new manager. I am authorized to place orders." "Ma'am, I do not know anything about management changes. What I know is that there is an outstanding balance of $10,000 on this account. Until I receive a certified check for that amount, no deliveries will be made." The call ended. Sarah set the phone down carefully. If she did not move carefully, she would throw it. And broken phones would not solve anything. $10,000. She had $127 in her checking account. She looked out the office window. William Cross was still at his table, still typing. He looked up, met her eyes. There was something in his expression that might have been satisfaction. He had known Marcus would strike back, known the suppliers would be compromised. This was part of the test, another layer of a trial that it seemed designed to break her. She could not ask Yamamoto for money. That would be admitting she could not handle this, that she needed to be rescued. She needed wine. Rare wine. Vintage wine that would satisfy the expectations of 50 people who'd spent more on dinner than most families spent on rent. And she needed it in 5 hours. Sarah grabbed her car keys. "Where are you going?" Cross asked as she walked past. "To save the dinner," Sarah said. "Watch the paint dry." She drove not to a wine warehouse, but to the suburbs. To a neighborhood of modest houses with neat lawns and American flags hanging from porches. To a street where she had delivered meals during the pandemic, where she had checked on elderly neighbors when the city shut down. She parked in front of a small house painted pale blue, knocked on the door. Mr. Harrison opened it. He was 75, a retired Boeing engineer whose wife had died 3 years ago. He had been a regular at the Sterling until Marcus had banned him for lingering too long over coffee, for taking up a valuable table with only a $20 check. Sarah had always brought him extra biscotti, had sat with him when the restaurant was slow and listened to stories about his late wife, about Margaret who had loved wine and laughter and growing tomatoes in the backyard. "Sarah?" Mr. Harrison blinked in surprise. Is everything all right? Mr. Harrison, Sarah said. She was breathing hard from running up his front walk. I need your help. I know you have a wine collection. I know it is precious to you, but I need to borrow 20 bottles, the best you have. I cannot pay you today, but I swear on my life I will pay you double their value by next week. Mr. Harrison studied her face, saw something there that made him nod. Is Marcus Sterling still at the Sterling? He asked. No, I fired him. I am running the restaurant now. The old man smiled. It was the first real smile Sarah had seen all day. Well then, he said, you had better come downstairs. The basement was climate-controlled and organized with the precision of someone for whom details mattered. Hundreds of bottles lay in custom racks, each one labeled with a small card noting the vintage, the vineyard, the occasion it was meant to commemorate. Mr. Harrison walked slowly along the rows, pulling bottles with the care of someone selecting which memories to share. This one, he said, holding up a bottle dark with age, the label handwritten in French. 1982 Chateau Margaux. Margaret and I bought this for our 50th wedding anniversary. She died before we could open it. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Mr. Harrison, I cannot take that. You can, he said firmly. You will. Margaret would want it enjoyed by someone who understands that the value of a thing is not what it costs. It is what it means. He pulled more bottles. A 1961 Petrus that he had bought the year his daughter was born. A Burgundy from a vineyard that no longer existed. Bottles that represented a lifetime of careful collecting, of moments saved and preserved. 24 bottles in total. He packed them in cardboard boxes with newspaper to keep them from clinking together. Pay me when you can, Mr. Harrison said as Sarah loaded them into her car. Or do not pay me at all. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Make that place what it should be, a restaurant where people matter more than money. Sarah drove back to the Sterling with tears on her face. The memory of Osaka hit her again. The izakaya near her apartment. The elderly couple who ran it. Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka. It had been her second year in Japan. Her mother had called with the cancer diagnosis. Sarah had sat at the bar of the izakaya trying not to cry, failing. Mrs. Tanaka had set down a cup of sake in front of her. Premium sake from their private reserve. Ganbate Sarah-chan, she had said. Do your best. Anata wa hitori janai. You are not alone. Mr. Tanaka had nodded, pouring more sake. In Japan, we have a word, kizuna. It means the bonds between people. These bonds are stronger than money, stronger than distance, stronger than death. Sarah had not understood then. She had been 24 and terrified in an ocean away from her mother. Now driving through Seattle with a trunk full of borrowed wine and borrowed time, she understood. The bonds we build, the debts we owe, the network of small kindnesses that hold us up when everything else falls apart. That was wealth. That was the only wealth that mattered. When she pulled up to the Sterling at 5:30, the staff was arriving for the evening shift. Chad and Tiffany, two servers who had been Marcus's favorites, who had learned from him that cruelty was the same as standards. They walked into the pristine dining room and stopped, looking around like they were seeing it for the first time. Where is the wine? Chad asked, staring at the empty display shelves. We cannot serve the mayor tap water. Sarah pointed to the center of the dining room. She had arranged Mr. Harrison's bottles on a table, each one dusty and unlabeled, looking like they had been recovered from a shipwreck. Tiffany laughed. It was not a kind sound. What is that trash? Did you dig it out of a dumpster? Sarah looked at her, really looked, saw a woman maybe 30 years old who had learned to survive in restaurants by being harder than everyone else, by never showing weakness, by becoming a smaller, meaner version of Marcus Sterling. That, Sarah said quietly, is a 1982 Chateau Margaux and a 1961 Petrus. Mr. Harrison's private collection. It is worth more than your car, Tiffany. More than mine. More than this building, probably. She turned to face all of them. The servers, the bartenders, the hosts, people who had worked alongside her for 3 years without ever really seeing her. Listen to me, Sarah said. Tonight we are not just serving food. We are under attack. Marcus wants us to fail. He wants to prove that someone like me cannot do this job. That people like us do not belong in places like this. Her voice grew stronger. But tonight we are going to serve a dinner that this city will talk about for 10 years. Not because the wine is expensive, not because the mayor is here, but because we are going to treat every single person who walks through that door like they matter. She looked at each of them. If you are with me, get your aprons on. If you are with Marcus, get out. Chad and Tiffany looked at each other, looked at the wine, looked at William Cross, who sat in his corner, watching everything with those ice-colored eyes. They put on their aprons. The doors opened at 6 o'clock. Mayor Patricia Donovan walked in first, flanked by her security detail and an entourage of city council members and their spouses. She was 56, sharp-featured, with the kind of smile that politicians developed after decades of practice. Sarah greeted her at the door, bowed slightly, led her to table one. The service was a blur. Sarah was everywhere, pouring wine that Mr. Harrison had saved for anniversaries and milestones, clearing plates, translating whispered instructions from Yamamoto, who had arrived silently and taken a seat at the bar, watching everything with those dark, intelligent eyes. The wine was a sensation. The mayor declared the Margot the finest she had ever tasted. Council members argued gently over whether the Patris was worth its legendary reputation. Conclusion, it exceeded it. The food cooked by a terrified Andre who knew his theft had been discovered and his future depended on tonight was flawless. Each plate a small architectural marvel. Sarah moved through the dining room like she was dancing. Pour, smile, retreat, appear when needed, disappear when not. For the first time since her mother died, she felt like she was doing what she was meant to do. And then, as the servers were bringing out the chocolate soufflés for dessert, the fire alarm triggered. The sound was deafening. Strobe lights flashed, turning the elegant dining room into a nightclub nightmare. The ear-piercing siren wailed with the enthusiasm of a system that had never been tested and was determined to prove its worth. And then the sprinklers hissed to life. Water began to rain down on 50 of Seattle's most powerful people, on their evening gowns and tailored suits, on chocolate soufflés that had taken hours to prepare, on everything. Chaos. The mayor stood up, her security detail immediately surrounding her. Council members grabbed their spouses. Everyone moved toward the exits. Sarah ran to the control panel near the kitchen, looked at the system display. No smoke detected, no heat signatures. This was not a fire. Someone had pulled the manual alarm. She saw the back door swinging shut, saw movement in the alley beyond. "Travis!" she screamed toward the security station. "The back door!" She did not wait. She ran through the kitchen, past cooks who were staring at the sprinklers with expressions of horror, past Andre who was watching 3 hours of work being literally washed down the drain, out into the alley. The rain had stopped, but the alley was still wet, puddles reflecting the security lights. A figure in a hooded sweatshirt was running toward a car parked at the far end. Sarah did not think. She ran. Her shoes were not made for running. She kicked them off mid-stride and kept going, barefoot on wet asphalt. The figure heard her coming, turned, tried to speed up. Sarah tackled him. They went down hard. Her shoulder hit the pavement with a crack that sent pain shooting down her arm. The figure tried to twist away, but Sarah held on, driven by something beyond logic, beyond self-preservation. The hood fell back. Danny, the busboy, the quiet one, the kid she had helped with college applications, the one who had warned her about Marcus that first night. Sarah pinned him down, both of them gasping for breath. "Danny?" Her voice broke. "Why?" He was crying, tears mixing with rain on his face. "I had to. He has my sister." "Who?" "Marcus." Danny's voice was shaking so hard he could barely speak. "He said he would call immigration on my sister. She is undocumented. He made me pull the alarm. I am sorry. I am so sorry." Sarah felt her heart break and harden simultaneously. "Go inside," she said, hauling him to his feet. "Turn off the alarm. Tell no one but me." "What about Marcus?" "I will handle Marcus. Go." She watched Danny run back inside, heard the alarm cut off. The sudden silence was almost as loud as the siren had been. She stood alone in the alley. Her blazer was ruined. Her knees were bleeding. She had just physically assaulted someone half her age in defense of a restaurant she had managed for less than 24 hours. She pulled out her phone to call the police. A slow clap echoed from the shadows. William Cross stepped out from behind the dumpster. He was not holding his tablet. He was holding a cigarette, the ember glowing orange in the darkness. "Impressive," he said. "Physical courage, quick thinking, loyalty to your staff even when they betray you." Sarah stared at him. Did you know? Did you know Marcus was blackmailing Danny?" Cross took a drag of his cigarette. "We suspected Mr. Sterling would attempt some form of retaliation. We needed to see how you would respond under pressure." The words hung in the air. "The alarm," Sarah said slowly. "This was staged. The mayor's security detail was informed in advance that this was a drill," Cross confirmed. "The council members were not, of course. Their reactions needed to be genuine." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. You let Danny think his sister was in danger. You let me think everything was collapsing. For a test. High finance is a cruel business, Miss Chen, Cross said. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it beneath his expensive shoe. Mr. Yamamoto needs to know if you can handle sharks. Tonight you proved you can swim with them. He started walking back toward the restaurant. Go inside, clean yourself up. The chairman wants to introduce you to the mayor, not as the interim manager. He paused at the door, as the CEO of his new North American hospitality division. Sarah stood in the alley as he disappeared inside. She had won. She had passed the test. But she had just learned something terrifying. Yamamoto and Cross were not saviors. They were players in a game where human lives were chess pieces, where tests had no warning and mercy was a weakness. She had traded Marcus Sterling, a petty tyrant who ruled one restaurant, for an empire that played with cities. When she walked back inside, the staff was mopping up water. The mayor was laughing, telling her security detail that this was the most exciting gala she had attended in years. Andre emerged from the kitchen, looked at Sarah's torn blazer, her bleeding knees, the mud on her face. He nodded once, a gesture of respect between soldiers who had survived the same battle. Sarah Chen was no longer a waitress. She was something else now, something she did not have a name for yet. But whatever it was, she had earned it in blood and wine and the cold calculation of powerful men who tested people the way scientists tested lab rats. She had passed. The question was, what had she won? 3 months passed. Sarah Chen made the cover of Seattle Chronicle's business section. The photograph showed her in a tailored Armani suit, standing in front of the Yamamoto Tower with the city skyline behind her. The headline read, "From Apron to Asset Management, the waitress who charmed a billionaire." The article called her inspiring, a modern Cinderella story, proof that America still rewarded hard work and merit. The article did not mention that she could not remember the last time she had slept through the night, that she stood in her penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, surrounded by furniture she had not chosen, wearing clothes that cost more than her mother's funeral, and felt like she was drowning. The Yamamoto Group's North American hospitality division was expanding aggressively. Sarah's days were filled with acquisition meetings, hostile takeovers, union negotiations that felt more like warfare than conversation. She fired people, lots of people, hotel managers who had worked their properties for 20 years, restaurant owners whose families had run the same business for 3 generations. She signed the termination letters with a pen that cost $800 and felt her soul compress a little more with each signature. William Cross was always there, standing at her shoulder, whispering in her ear with that crisp British accent, "Efficiency, Miss Chen. Sentimentality is a luxury reserved for the poor. You are no longer poor." But she did not feel rich. She felt hollow. The intercom on her desk buzzed. Her assistant, a sharp woman named Jennifer, who made $70,000 a year to manage Sarah's calendar, spoke with the urgency reserved for disasters. "Miss Chen, Mr. Cross is here, and the police." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. "Send them in." The door opened. William Cross entered first, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked disheveled. His tie was slightly loose. There was a crease in his suit jacket. Behind him came 2 detectives. Seattle Police Department, Homicide Division badges, which made no sense because nobody was dead. And behind them, walking with the confidence of a man who had already won, was Marcus Sterling. He looked better than he had the night he was fired. Tanned, manicured. His suit was pinstripe Brioni, the kind that announced wealth without needing to speak. He smiled at Sarah, but the smile never reached his eyes. "Hello, Sarah," Marcus said, sitting down in one of her guest chairs without being invited. "Nice office, bit large for someone who cannot pronounce sommelier correctly, but I suppose they needed space for all that unearned confidence." Sarah stood. Every instinct screamed at her to throw him out, to call security, to do something other than let this man who had tormented her sit in her office like he owned it. "What is this, Marcus? If you came for a reference, the answer is no." Marcus laughed. It was the same cruel sound she remembered from the Sterling, from 100 small humiliations spread across 3 years. "I do not need a reference," he said. He pulled a thick folder from his briefcase and slid it across her desk. "I have a subpoena." Sarah looked at the detectives. They looked uncomfortable, like they would rather be anywhere else. "What is he talking about?" she asked. The older detective, a man with gray in his beard and tired eyes, stepped forward. "Miss Chen, we need to ask you some questions about financial irregularities at the Sterling restaurant. Mr. Sterling has provided evidence suggesting the restaurant was being used to launder money through vendor invoices. He alleges that you were promoted to CEO to help cover the tracks. The room tilted. Sarah gripped the edge of her desk. That is a lie, she said. I caught Chef Andre stealing inventory. I fixed the problem. I cleaned the books. Did you? Marcus leaned forward, his smile widening. Or did you just take over the operation? I have digital logs, Sarah. Emails sent from your account. Authorization for payments to shell companies that do not exist. Offshore accounts. The whole elegant structure. He tapped the folder. The discrepancies did not stop when I left. They got bigger, and every single one was authorized by your login credentials. Sarah opened the folder with hands that shook. Inside were printouts of emails, dozens of them, sent from her account to vendors she had never heard of, approving payments for services never rendered. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars over 3 months. These are forged, she whispered. Digital forensics will determine that, the detective said. His voice was not unkind, but it was firm. But for now, Miss Chen, we need you to come with us for questioning, and we are freezing the assets of the hospitality division pending investigation. William Cross finally spoke. His voice was cold with rage. This is a shakedown. Marcus, who is backing you? You do not have the intelligence or resources to fabricate evidence of this sophistication. Marcus stood, buttoning his jacket with the care of a man savoring victory. You are right, William. I am just the face. But there are other billionaires in this city, old money that does not appreciate new money coming in and buying their favorite restaurants. They have better lawyers than you, better hackers, better everything. He turned to Sarah. You took my life. You humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered. You made me a joke. And now I am going to watch you get arrested. Watch you lose everything. And the best part? Marcus leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper. Yamamoto will drop you. He cannot afford a scandal. You will be back to waiting tables. Except no one will hire you, not after fraud charges. So maybe not tables. Maybe just back to your studio apartment, drowning in debt you can never repay. The detectives were talking. Something about rights and remaining silent. Sarah heard the words, but they seemed to come from very far away. She looked out the window of her corner office, at the city below, at the life she had been living for 3 months that felt like someone else's dream. She thought about the emails, about how they could have been sent from her account. The account required biometric authentication. A fingerprint scan every time she logged in. It was supposed to be unhackable, unless someone had cloned her fingerprint. The memory hit her like cold water, the night of the gala, after she tackled Danny in the alley. She had been muddy, bleeding, her hands covered in grit and rain. Someone had helped her up, had handed her a tablet to sign a security report. Travis. Travis, the security guard, who had worked for Marcus, who had grabbed Yamamoto that first night. Travis, who had disappeared after being fired, who everyone assumed had left the city, had moved on. Travis, who wore an ankle holster. She had seen it that first night when he bent down to pick up Yamamoto's briefcase. Had seen the bulge of a second phone, the kind people carried when they did not want their activities tracked. The pieces came together with the click of a lock opening. It was Travis, Sarah said. Marcus's smile faltered, just for a second, just long enough for Sarah to know she was right. I do not know what you are talking about, he said. Sarah turned to the detectives. Travis cloned my biometric data. The night of the gala, he gave me a tablet to sign a security report, but it was not a report. It was a scanner. He captured my fingerprint. That is how the emails were sent. Prove it, Marcus said. His voice was not as steady now. Travis is long gone, probably in Mexico or Canada or anywhere that is not here. Is he? Sarah looked at William Cross. Track Travis's phone. Cross was already moving, pulling out his tablet. We confiscated his company phone when he was terminated. Not that phone, Sarah said. The second one. He keeps it in an ankle holster. I saw it the first night. He would need it to stay in contact with whoever is paying him. Her mind was racing now, connecting dots, seeing patterns. Travis is greedy. You did not pay him enough to leave the country, Marcus. You paid him enough to hide, and where does a man like Travis hide? She looked at the detectives. The wine cellar at the Sterling, the sub-basement. It is climate controlled. It has food. It has no cell service, which means he cannot be tracked, unless he connects to the building Wi-Fi, which he would need to do to upload forged emails. William Cross's fingers flew across his tablet. He went very still. She is right, he said quietly. There is a device connected to the restaurant's network. Username Travis_admin. broadcasting from the cellar level. The detective touched his earpiece. Dispatch, I need a unit at the Sterling restaurant immediately. Suspect may be in the building. Marcus's face went from confident to pale in the space of a heartbeat. He lunged for the door. The second detective, younger and faster, caught him by the arm. Going somewhere, Mr. Sterling? They let him out. Marcus was shouting. Threats, accusations, legal promises that sounded hollow even to him. Sarah sank into her chair. The adrenaline that had carried her through the deduction was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. William Cross looked at her with something that might have been respect. You just saved the company, Miss Chen. Again, that was exceptional detective work. I did not know, Sarah said. About the cellar, I guessed. Travis hates heat. He sweats constantly. The cellar is the coldest place in the building. It was probability, not certainty. Cross almost smiled. Mister. Yamamoto chose well. A wolf in sheep's clothing. No, Sarah said. She stood, picked up her purse. He chose a waitress. And I am done being a CEO, William. Draft the resignation letter. I am going back to the restaurant. Cross stopped smiling. You cannot be serious. You are a hero. You just exposed a criminal conspiracy. You have a $400,000 salary and stock options that will make you a millionaire. I also have not slept in 3 months, Sarah said. I fired a hotel manager yesterday because the numbers said his property was underperforming. Do you know what I found out after I signed the termination letter? His wife has dementia. He was taking unpaid time to care for her. The performance issues were because he was human. She looked at Cross. I have become the thing that killed my father. The memory was there, sharp and painful. Sarah was 12. Her father, James Chen, had been a line cook at a hotel restaurant downtown. 15 years he had worked there. 15 years of early mornings and late nights, of burns and cuts and the slow destruction that kitchen work inflicted on bodies. They had called it downsizing, restructuring, making the business more efficient. They had called it anything except what it was. Throwing away a human being because the numbers said they could hire 2 part-timers for less than 1 full-timer with benefits. Her father had never recovered. Depression had settled over him like fog. He had cycled through a series of jobs, each one worse than the last. His hands, which had cooked thousands of meals, had started to shake. He had died of a heart attack when Sarah was 18. The coroner said it was cardiovascular disease. Sarah knew it was despair, and now she was the one signing termination letters. She was the efficiency William Cross whispered about. I am done, she said again. Draft the letter. 2 weeks later, the Sterling closed to the public for a private dinner. Inside, candles flickered against rain-streaked windows. The storm had returned, as it always did in Seattle, but inside there was warmth. Takeshi Yamamoto sat at table 5. He looked smaller than Sarah remembered, frailer. But his eyes were still sharp, still intelligent, still capable of seeing through pretense to truth. Sarah stood before him. The expensive suits were gone. She wore black trousers and a white shirt and an apron tied around her waist. The uniform of service. Yamamoto spoke in Japanese. Nas? Why? Watashi wa anata ni okoku wo atemashita. I gave you a kingdom. Anata wa sore wo keshimashita. You returned it. Sarah replied in the same language. Watashi wa ju de wa arimasen. I am not a queen. Eno tower de wa sara ga wareru oto wo kikamasen deshita. In that tower I could not hear the sound of plates breaking. Sumatai mizu no kankaku wa wasuremashita. I forgot the feeling of cold water on my hands. Kore wo suki nariu wo wasuremashita. I forgot why I love this. Yamamoto studied her for a long moment. Then he slid a small wooden box across the table. Inside was a tea bowl, but this was not an ordinary bowl. It had been shattered once, the cracks visible as dark lines across the ceramic. But the cracks had been filled with gold lacquer, veins of precious metal that made the breaks beautiful instead of shameful. Kintsugiku, Yamamoto said softly. Warware wa hibi wo kakushimasen. We do not hide the cracks. Gold de tsuyoku shimasu. We make them strong with gold, Sabasenen. He touched the bowl gently. Kono restaurant wa kowarete imashita. This restaurant was broken. Watashi ga kowashimashita. I broke it. Anata ga kowashimashita. You broke it. Shikashi anata wa gold desu. But you are the gold. He took a sip of tea. I accept your resignation as CEO. Sarah felt something release in her chest. Thank you, sir. Shikashi, Yamamoto said, producing a legal document. I cannot allow you to be just a waitress. I am restructuring. I keep 49%. I am giving 51% to you. Sarah's hands went still. Sir, that is millions of dollars. I cannot accept. It is a debt, Yamamoto said firmly. You saved my legacy. You taught a stubborn old man that value is not in bank accounts but in hearts, in people who see other people. He stood, bowed deeply. Partner? Sarah bowed back. Tears burned her eyes. The doors opened. Not the mayor this time, not politicians or power brokers. Carlos walked in first, uncomfortable in a borrowed suit. Rosa and her two sons followed, looking around like they were in a museum and might break something. Leo the dishwasher. Chef Andre, still in his whites because he refused to change. Danny, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Mr. Harrison entered last, using a cane, smiling. They stood at the threshold, uncertain. They knew this dining room, had cleaned it, worked in it, been invisible in it, but they had never been guests here. Tonight, Sarah said, the owner serves you. She guided Danny to table 5, the best seat, where Yamamoto had first sat, where mayors and senators made deals. Danny was crying. Miss Chen, I almost ruined everything. I pulled the alarm. You protected your sister, Sarah said gently. That is not a sin, Danny. That is love. She seated Rosa beside him. Rosa, who cleaned hotel rooms and had taught Sarah that clean floors were the foundation of dignity. Sarah poured wine for her. Not cheap wine, the last bottle of Mr. Harrison's collection. A Burgundy from a vineyard that had closed in 1987. Carlos sat at table 7. Sarah brought him duck confit with cherry gastrique, the signature dish that Andre had perfected over 15 years. I just washed dishes, Carlos protested. You wash away chaos, Sarah said. You make tomorrow possible. That is sacred work. Chef Andre sat stiffly at table 9. Sarah sat beside him. I know about all of it, she said quietly. Every truffle, every pound of beef you stole. Andre looked at his plate. Then why am I not in prison? Because everyone deserves a second chance. Yamamoto gave me one. I am giving you one. But Andre, if you steal again, I will drive you to the police station myself. The chef nodded, could not speak. Mr. Harrison stood slowly, raised his glass with a shaking hand. My wife Margaret used to say that the measure of a restaurant is not the crystal on the table. It is the kindness in the kitchen. He looked at Sarah. You gave these walls a soul, Sarah. Margaret would have loved you. To Sarah, he said, to second chances, to seeing people. Everyone drank. Yamamoto stood, switched to English so everyone could understand. Many years ago, he said, I was thrown into the rain like garbage. Because I was poor. Because I broke a plate. Tonight I watched Sarah Chen give dignity to people who have been invisible. This is true wealth. He bowed to Sarah. You are my foundation. Sarah walked to the window. Outside, the rain fell on the city. Inside, the people she had helped, who had helped her, were eating and laughing and being seen. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, like veins of gold, like kintsugi made manifest in the world. 6 months later, the Sterling had changed. Still elegant, still excellent, but different in ways that mattered. The staff wore name tags with years of service instead of job titles. Danny was assistant manager taking business classes at Seattle Central College. Carlos was kitchen supervisor, bringing his family to staff meal every Sunday. Rosa's sons worked as hosts. Sarah had paid for their culinary school. Chef Andre still ruled the kitchen, but taught free cooking classes for low-income youth every Saturday. Mr. Harrison had a permanent table where he brought different elderly widows and widowers each week. Sarah's Supper Club, they called it. The Seattle Chronicle sent a food critic. The review appeared on a Wednesday. The Sterling under new management represents something rare in fine dining. Excellence without exclusivity. Sarah Chen has achieved the impossible. The food is extraordinary. But what is truly remarkable is watching the CEO personally serve water to an elderly man who wandered in from the bus stop, treating him with the same reverence shown to the governor at the next table. Sarah read the review at the bar. On the same page was a smaller article. Marcus Sterling had been sentenced to 3 years for fraud and extortion. Travis had testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. She felt no satisfaction, just sadness. Marcus had been crushed by the same system that had almost crushed her. The difference was she had found Yamamoto. He had found no one. The door opened. Sarah looked up. Mrs. Whitmore walked in. The woman who had warned about clumsy help, who had clutched her pearls when Yamamoto entered dripping wet. Sarah approached carefully. Welcome to the Sterling. Table for one? Mrs. Whitmore looked uncomfortable, smaller somehow. Miss Chen, I came to apologize. Sarah blinked. For what? For being cruel. For treating you like furniture. I have been doing it my whole life to people who are just like I was 40 years ago. She took a breath. My husband does not know this, but I was a maid once, in this neighborhood. Rich families treated me like I was invisible. When I married money, I became what I hated, because I thought that was what wealth required. Tears appeared in her eyes. You showed me I was wrong. May I have dinner here, and may I apologize to your staff? Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Of course, but no apology needed, Mrs. Whitmore. Just see them. That is all anyone wants. She seated the woman at table 5. Danny took her order with grace. Mrs. Whitmore looked at his name tag. Danny, she said. I am Patricia. I am sorry I screamed that night. Water under the bridge, ma'am, Danny said, smiling. Can I start you with our special? At closing time, Sarah found an envelope on the bar, Yamamoto's handwriting, Japanese calligraphy. She opened it. Sarah-san, when I walked into the Sterling 6 months ago, I was testing a restaurant. I found something rarer, a human being with kintsugi spirit. You taught an old man that buildings and profit and empire mean nothing if they crush the people who build them. I am returning to Tokyo permanently. My health is declining, but I leave knowing this restaurant will honor what I forgot. Dignity costs nothing. It is worth everything. The 51% is yours. No conditions. Build what you want. But I have one request. Never stop serving, not because you must, because you choose to. With respect and affection, Takeshi Yamamoto, postscript. William Cross is insufferable, but loyal. Keep him close. Sarah sat at the bar, reading the letter 3 times. She cried. First time she had cried from joy since her mother died. She was rich now, actually wealthy, owner of a business worth $15 million. But more than that, she had family. She had purpose. She had the ability to change how an industry treated people. She wrote a business plan that night, the Invisible Patron Initiative, a nonprofit wing that would train the formerly incarcerated, the homeless, immigrants in hospitality skills, partner with other restaurants, fund scholarships. Everyone deserves to be seen. 1 year later, the Sterling was the flagship of 5 restaurants operating under the same model. Sarah still worked the floor 3 nights a week, refused to be only a CEO. She wore the same black trousers, white shirt, apron. One Tuesday evening, the rain falling as it always did, the door opened. An elderly woman entered, soaked coat, worn shoes, clutching her purse like it contained everything she owned. She looked lost. The new host, reformed Chad, started to approach. Sarah stepped in. I have this one, she said. She walked to the woman, offered her arm. Welcome to the Sterling. Come in from the rain. I have a warm seat for you. The woman trembled. I do not have much money. That is okay, Sarah said gently. Tonight, dinner is on the house, because everyone deserves dignity. She seated the woman at table 5, always reserved for the invisible patron. Brought soup, bread, tea, watched the woman eat, watched tension leave her shoulders. Sarah looked at her reflection in the window. Behind her, the restaurant glowed. Danny managing the floor, Andre training at-risk youth in the kitchen, Carlos and Rosa laughing at staff meal, Mr. Harrison with his group of lonely seniors, Mrs. Whitmore volunteering alongside paid staff. On the bar, Yamamoto's kintsugi bowl, broken thing made beautiful, like the Sterling, like Sarah, like everyone who had been seen. Rain fell outside. Inside, warmth, laughter, the sound of dishes, the bonds between people. Sarah poured tea for the elderly woman at table 5. The city lights reflected on wet pavement like veins of gold. She had learned what Yamamoto tried to teach her that first night. Power is not about who sits at the table. It is about who chooses to serve. And every day, Sarah chose to serve. Not because she had to, because there was no greater honor than seeing another person and helping them see themselves. The restaurant glowed in the rainy night like a lantern, a place where the invisible became visible, where broken things were mended with gold, where everyone who walked through the door mattered. Sarah smiled. She was home.